morning, I'm Bob. I'm an alcoholic. Anthony DeMello. A man found an eagle's egg and put it in the nest in a barnyard of a barnyard hen. The eaglet hatched with the brood of chicks and grew up with them. All his life, the eagle did what barnyard chicks did, thinking he was a barnyard chicken. He scratched the earth for worms and insects, he clucked and cackled, and he would thrash his wings and fly a few feet up into the air. Years passed and the eagle grew very old. One day he saw a magnificent bird in a cloudless sky. It glided with graceful majesty in the powerful wind currents, with scarcely a beat of its strong golden wings. The old eagle looked up in awe and said, "What's that?" He asked. "That's an eagle, the king of the birds," said his neighbor. "He belonged to the sky. We belong to the earth. We're chickens." So the eagle lived and died a chicken, for that's what he thought he was. Part of what we do for each other is we see the eagle and the chicken. We see the real potential of each other as we bring our broken selves to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Come up here, Joe. And is Collins? Come up here, Collins. More like Vulture and Robin. We have. Many years ago, at a retreat that I attended, there was a monk by the name of Basil Pennington, who was kind of like a Thomas Merton in a way in the Trappist. He was an extraordinary guy. He was killed in a mission in India. We did a spiritual exercise, and in the spiritual exercise, you were given a piece of paper and you wrote down the following things. I'd give Joe and I'd give Rick a piece of paper. And on one list of the piece of paper, I'd say, write down everything you have. Your car, your house, your wristwatch, your sunglasses, your bank account, all the sorts of things. On the second column, write down all your beliefs. In the third column, write down all your accomplishments, your business and your family and all those sorts of things. And so we wrote down, and each of us had maybe 15 or 20 things on that list. And then the exercise was, so let's assume that Joe is a more moneyed man and Rick is not as moneyed as Joe. So he would have maybe a longer list, maybe more accomplishments. So then I'd say to Joe and Rick, erase the top 3 things on your list of what you have. And then ask what's left. Erase the next 3 things on your list and ask what's left. One of the lists was your physical attributes, 6 feet tall, weight, athletic ability, whatever that thing. Erase the top 3 things on that list and then ask what's left. And what we did, 2 very different men, is we removed every distinction that you could draw a difference from. So that when you reduced the physicality, the materialism, the belief system, and you kept asking what was left, there was never any question about whether there was anything left. But when you got down to the bottom, there was nothing to distinguish Joe from Rick. And that's part of what happens in these places. There is a melting, thank you. There's a melting down of the ego, and the barriers and distinctions The fundamental thing that is in our way is the ego. It is the blueprint for dysfunction. It is the human agenda. It is not personal. It is not the ownership of alcoholics. It is the human condition. It is the part of us that feels separate. It is the part of us that wants to be right and make other people wrong. It's the part of it that generates fear. It's the part of it that generates our story, because a story makes us distinct and different and separate. We will never be rid of the ego. We are not, so most of us, without some of the distinctions that we have in Alcoholics Anonymous, thought that that construction of identity was who we are. Thought that that construction of personality is who we are. Thought that that voice in our head was who we are and what we really thought. And if you go through all the literature, people talk about true self, false self. Everybody would identify what I just described as the false self. And what would be the true self? Our spiritual identity. Separate and distinct and not differentiated, not materialistic, not personalized, not connected to our personality, not connected to our story. I strongly believe, even though we are people of the story, that in order to get the full measure of what's available in our program, you have to, at some point in time, abandon your story. For most of us in our early recovery, our story is one of somewhat victimization. The wisdom of our program is just astounding. I, in my life, have read a fair amount of spiritual literature. I just keep getting reminded about how wonderful the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is, about how many spiritual ideas that we talk about as being very common are in other spiritual traditions, and whether we got them first or they got them, almost all the other spiritual traditions had them before we did. But the wisdom of it is just extraordinary. I heard someone not awfully long ago talk about the first 3 steps are to give up, 4 and 5 are to own up, 6, 7, 8, 9 are to clean up, and 10, 11, and 12 are to grow up. But if you took a broken person who really has to start their life over, for many people, that's a real question about whether I want to. I mean, they kind of know, even though we're talking about quitting drinking, I'm 45 years old and I burnt my life to the ground. I'm not sure that checking out wouldn't be a hell of a lot easier than what you guys are asking me to do. I've tried this 3 times before, and I wasn't able to do it. There is a fundamental saying yes to life. And many of us, the ego fundamentally says no. And therein lies, one of the grounded spiritual oppositional aspects to our spiritual growth. Transformation. Howard, did you memorize the transformation, what it says in the book when Bill talks about that we can now do and think?
No.
Who can recite that? But fundamentally it says that we can now do, think, and do things that we were never able to do before. One definition of transformation by Eckhart Tolle talks about it's a discontinuity in its development, a leap to an entirely different level of being. Most important, a lessening of materiality. So the more we, last night one of the questions about, what do I do when someone offends my belief system? I mean, that is what we are. We are constantly being offended and drawing distinctions and constantly in judgment. We just notice, it's pretty hard to be around Gary Eubank without noticing deficiencies. And it is, and you just, and it just, Someone once said you can't learn what you don't already know. And hasn't that been many of our experiences in Alcoholics Anonymous, where you're sitting in a meeting or in a retreat like this and someone says something and your soul just goes, oh yeah. It doesn't go, isn't that interesting? I think I'll take a note. I'm going to write that down. It just goes, oh yeah. And it just knows. I don't give a darn if you have 3 months of sobriety or 30 years. It just knows that it heard something cool. And that's the knower. We have, how many times have you been on a 12-step call or in a conversation with a sponsor or in a conversation with the car driving someplace and something comes out of your mouth that you've never said before, you've never thought before, that is really appropriate, right on target, and it comes through you, not by or of you. Okay. Transformation. Bill already was talking about transformation when he said first thing that happens to us is a spiritual, some spiritual event that changes us from the liar, protected, defended person, unwilling to answer questions or participate. And if we participate, it's a begrudging sort of compliance rather than what comes after a full surrender, which is, you know, kind of an all-in sort of thing. So, and many of us come in with a begrudging surrender, you know, compliance, and that grows as we seep, as we bring our damp log to the campfire of AA. It dries out and it catches fire. And without even knowing it, all of a sudden we're having snippets of conversation about God, and we're not, you know, it just bleeds into us. It is, you know, there's an awful lot of people today that poo-poo meeting-based sobriety, you know, that it's got to be book-based sobriety. Well, there is something that happens in meetings. There's a collective consciousness in a meeting. There's checking your mind at the door and joining the collective mind of the group. And for many of us, that was the highest spiritual hour and a half that we had, certainly during that day and sometimes during the week. And little by little, we were able to take some of that out of the meeting with us. Why we talk about transformation? We talked about surrender. It's a pretty ambitious subject, and I don't know one that we will be able to do justice to, but without question, the changes that take place in the progress in the meetings and through the step work of Alcoholics Anonymous is a transformation. It's not an improvement. It's not a test that you pass. It's not a body of information that all of a sudden you have available to you. It's a transformation. Your thinking is entirely different. How you see things is entirely different. In order to have a transformation take place, there has to be a shift in consciousness. And later, I assume both Howard and I will do some talking about that in the subject of spirituality when we get into it next. But when you think that steps 1 through 9, steps 5 through 9, when we talk about doing, some people think the decision in the third step is to do the work of the next 5 steps, or 6 steps. When you start to think that your grudge list ends up, your resentment list ends up being your amends list. And when you talk about, is that a change? I mean, no, it's a transformation. The person that can go from literally the people who he or she has blamed for the condition and circumstances of their lives to, in the 4th and 5th step, owning their life. We can't go any place until we are at cause in our own lives, until we own our lives. And that's an empowerment that is unbelievable. That empowerment is what allows us to go from 5 to 9, to be able to go make amends to a person that you believed harmed and reduced you. In order to do that meaningfully, there had to be a significant shift in consciousness. If I had a magic wand and I could say, I'm going to take away every issue and problem that we all have in this room, on the condition that we come back in 10 years, all of us in this room, you'd have a hell of a nice period of time after all the problems are removed from your life. But if you came back in 10 years and there wasn't any increase in your consciousness, you would have recreated most of the problems that you have in this room today. I jokingly talk about when I used to, there's a number of things I was going to put in my AA talk and didn't, but I talk about in my earlier days in AA, I failed most regularly in putting the principles into action in my life. But I tried and failed, tried and failed, tried and failed, tried and failed, but I still grew. But there comes a time where you either grow and change, or you stop growing. And that's a fork in the road that most of us get to at some point in time in our recovery. And for most of us, it involves getting deeper into the steps, having a more spiritual grounding rather than a material, dogmatic, word-based, mind-based interaction with the steps. And a change from them being just about doing to an alteration of heart. And it isn't like we haven't had an alteration in our heart prior to that, but there needs to be a deepening for us to get to the causes and conditions and some of the things that hold us back and reduce the opportunity of our lives. At that fork in the road, you either get deeper into the program or you build an addition onto your house to accommodate the problem. Okay. Chasers hang out with the chasers, gamblers hang out with the gamblers, and I won't call you on your crap, you don't call me on mine. We'll talk about the steps, we'll do the traditions, we'll go to detox together. You stay off of my business and I'll stay out of yours. Deal? It's a bad deal. Okay. It is the people who I try to be closest to in Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you're going to do that with each other, you need compassion and a lack of judgment. Because we won't have that's part of the problem what we have about having the conversation with ourselves. We're too judgmental. But we bring that knife to our own gun for our own fight. We cut ourselves with that knife, and it is the level of honesty it takes to have that internal conversation about certain things that are not working in my life keeps running into my judgment. And it's a little circuit. I'm a good enough guy to feel bad about it, but I don't seem to be effective enough to change it. In order to have that shift change, I've got to, what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross has talked about, the 5 stages of death and dying: denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance, and depression and acceptance. Denial is, don't have the problem. Someone diagnoses you with cancer, I'm going to get a second opinion. Anger is, why the hell is this happening to me? I'm a pretty good guy. Bargaining, God, please take this away and I'll devote my life to you. Depression, which is now caused by the overwhelming circumstance I find myself. And then Scott Peck said a word, but if you allow depression to do its work, and I'm not now speaking about a medical clinical depression, although I got into a medical clinical depression the first time I went broke. I'm talking about a depression related to a very difficult circumstance in our lives. If you allow depression to do its work, which is to grind the ego to dust. When Bill says pain is a touchstone of growth, what he's talking about is it reduces the ego enough to crack open the egg that has no entry point. Where when people have been trying to get something to our essential selves, there's no way to get in. But the pain cracks open the egg and reduces the ego and creates an opening, creates a humility that allows me to be present both to the truth and to the answer. And I no longer have my fortress around that particular item. I no longer have a fence built around it and have it isolated within my program. And in that process, there is a raising in consciousness. The process of change for most of us, first of all, a hell of a lot of what we've got going on in our lives that isn't very workable. I mean, there's a hell of a lot of angry men. Okay, women pick that up. You don't even have to say a word. I mean, women intuit, and we don't think we're, I didn't say anything. I don't know what got me. It might have been the machete, but it was just, it was. But we create the space in which other people experience us. And for those of us that are so mind-bound, we think other people experience us only by what we tell them and what we say. But there are a lot of things going on in the human being that we can intuit, not judge, but sense. And so we defend ourselves so completely that there are certain things we are unwilling to know about ourselves. So I make that joke about, that fork in the road. Okay, you go down that fork in the road and you make that deal where you're not going to talk about some of the unworkability of your life. We not only do not want to change. Okay, that's the problem. We don't want to change. We don't want to know. So you train the people in your lives as to what they can talk to you about and how they can talk to you about it. You train your kids. You train your wife. We're not having that conversation. You want to have that conversation? It's going to be a tough goddamn conversation. Come ahead if you really want to have that conversation. You train your kids. You train your employees. You train your boss. You train your sponsor. I mean, your sponsor knows what, half of the serious issues in your life are at the level of complaint. They're not the level of business. And it's frustrating to be able to, and there are certain guys that are just clearer. You sit down and they, what I used to do with Milos and Jones, and I have other guys that I do it with now, is you just check in. You haven't seen each other in 3 or 4 months, and you just do a dump. Just to let us know what's going on. All of us got something going on. I mean, it's not, there's no one to get to the point where you're doing everything so great that, but it is that old story that I talked about, guys doing a 4-step and he's having trouble with the columns, and I'm saying, don't bother with that. Get your 2 ex-wives, get your boss, get your ex-boss, get your mother-in-law, get your children, get your co-workers, and bring about 10 of them into the house, give them a pad of paper and pass it out and say, we have a step in Alcoholics Anonymous where we're trying to get in touch with our defects of character, and I'm having trouble identifying mine. Almost none of us would call that meeting. Okay. Why? We're afraid of change. And number 2, we do not want to know in a conscious way. So the process of change is, first of all, you have to get it out of your subconscious and have it become once it's conscious, you can bring it into your program and you can start to attend to it. Then you can direct your attention and intention in those arenas of our lives. But most of us, the monster lives in the garage and the garage door is shut and everything's okay. But 1 or 2 days a month it gets out, takes over my body, uses me for a day and a half, and then I put it back or it puts itself back in the garage, locks it and everything's okay. So the process, someone asked the question last night, does 6 and 7 really get rid of your defects of character? It's the only way to get rid of your defects of character. They're the tools that you've designed to live your life. And that's the best you know how to do prior to developing a manner of living which is spiritual based. I've used up my time. I'm going to circle back to this thing, but the fact is almost everything. I think I did it, even though I went over time. I think it was better than when you went over. We cannot, because it's spiritual, we cannot control that process. We cannot go touch our lives and do it with muscle or resistance. When Don talked about resistance, or I forget the word he used, it doesn't work. Putting a Band-Aid over the boil does not work. So I'll circle back. Howard, sorry.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you for your share. And thank you guys for having us. This has been a very, very good, just a wonderful experience, and I'm grateful for it. Years ago, I somehow got invited to participate with Clancy in a AA history thing, and he called me and asked me what I was going, because he didn't want me and him to do the same thing. So I said, well, I'm going to do my history on the 12 and 12. And I used that example that I used yesterday probably 3 or 4 times about step 1 and meditate, because I had doubt about it, meditating on it. And the way I described it then was, a voice said to me, why don't you levitate the thing up? And I went, so I told that story, you guys heard it. Afterwards, Clancy thanked me for my share, told me it was great research and great thing to know in history about why Bill wrote the 12 and 12. But he said, I want to tell you something. I want you to know 2 things. When we talk to God, we call that prayer. And when God talks to us, we call that schizophrenia. That is intimidating when I'm going to tell my story, because so now I think I say most of the time that that a thought came to me, which is really a better description of what happened. A thought comes to me, which later seems like it was a voice. But Clancy, Duffy, do you remember Duffy? Yep. Duffy was scheduled to be the Sunday morning speaker at the first Mount High conference that the Pacific Group had. And I had just moved to Phoenix. And I got a call from Jim Shaw, who said Duffy canceled, and Clancy suggested you as a replacement for the Sunday morning. And I thought, Jesus, I've always loved Clancy. I didn't know he had such discerning judgment. And anyway, I flew over there, and there have been some things that I've been quietly critical about with the Pacific Group. But I was quiet about it because when I told my mentor, Frank Giroux, about Clancy making his sponsees clean the dog shit out of his yard, Frank said, Howard, don't be a Clancy basher. I want you to look good in the program, and there's no Clancy bashers that look good. Keep your eye on Clancy, and if you see where he don't care about people getting sober, come and tell me that. But don't tell me about cleaning up dog shit in the yard. And I got it. So I didn't know Clancy very well, but I was honored. And that night, after the speaker, I went to an afterwards kind of party in the cafeteria, and Clancy beating out songs on the piano, and we sang them. And they had lyrics to these songs that thick. And I knew the lyrics without looking them up. I mean, I knew the lyrics to every song. And we were singing Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain. Now, I have never felt good about my childhood. I had forgiven my dad for the beatings and stuff. I saw that I didn't give him, he didn't have a chance. And my behavior didn't give him any options. And I cut him the slack. But I never felt good about my childhood. And when they were playing Blue Eyes, we were singing Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain, I guess I'll call it a deja vu experience, but it was a real mind's eye view of when I was a child, sitting under my mom, under our dining room table, looking out the crocheted hole in the tablecloth at Foster Mears, who was singing Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain. And I just it just came to me. God bless Dad. He brought country music into my life, and without knowing it before, I got it that country music has been a therapy for me. That's something that I have used just intuitively to find some peace in my when I was a kid, and it just continued on. The next day, they had a softball tournament. That was another thing that I had been quietly critical of, but I had been quiet about it. And I was watching this, and they were changing fields. They were having a tournament. And when they were doing that, I remembered again an instance when I was a kid, and I was the bat boy. And I was the bat boy because my dad had volunteered to be the manager of this baseball team so that his kids could be active in the baseball. My brother was older, but I was the bat boy. And I thought that was such a good thing for him to do. To do this, it's a pain in the ass. And he did that so that us kids could get into it. And I know I'm taking long, but I ain't going to take, okay. And, funny thing. And when he came back to Phoenix, the thought came to me. I gave you 2 freebies last weekend, about your dad being good to you. Perhaps if you made an effort on your own, you would find some more. And so I set aside a meditation period where I would deliberately think back at something good Dad had done, and I would relive that. I would have a meditation where I re-experienced that, where I'm in my mind, and the idea was that I was going to feel good about it. Now, I didn't get the feeling like I did up at the retreat, but for example, I remember when my dad, and we were a block from the damn school, Dad was waiting for us with a car. And I didn't know why he was waiting for us, but my brother and I went out, and he said, "Get in, I'll take you home." And when we went home, we drove back behind the house, and he had built a prize-winning basketball goal and court. And he had, in order to do that, he had to cut the guy's hair and shave him for free. The guy that did the telephone poles for the phone company, he bartered a telephone pole. He was so proud of that, and God knows we were. You know, that Bill and I stayed out there after dark. You couldn't even see, shooting basketball goals. I never made one, but if you shoot them in the dark, it don't make a shit. You can see in your head. But, okay. There was a whole series of just a lifetime, a childhood full of efforts that Dad made to enrich our lives, with him not making any money and just barely making it. He broke his butt to make sure that Bill and I had the same kind of life that all the other kids that had more had. And finally, he dug a hole in the backyard, borrowed somebody's trailer, hauled that dirt out, and went down to the creek and filled it full of sand and brought it in and built a pole vault standard and a high jump standard for us to have. And in my meditation, I remembered that I was just sitting in the sand one time, and I imagined I was sitting there again, and then I lost control. I lost my meditation, or my fantasy changed involuntarily to me having just been whipped. And I couldn't get my breath. And I went out of the back of the barber shop. And that was me as a little kid. Then as me now in the fantasy, I hugged the little kid. And I said to myself, it turns out a hell of a lot better than it looks like it's going to. And then I felt us being hugged, me and the little kid. And I looked up, and it was my dad. And he was crying, and he had the most loving expression on his face. And I was transformed. Not only was I transformed, but my whole childhood was transformed. I've got a ton of, that's just been a wonderful part of this whole process. When I talked about that thing, I was saying that I have power, I can pick this up. And then the voice coming, levitated. Well, that's transforming. When I look at my inventory and I see how selfish I've been, and I think, I don't want to, and I saw it deep enough that I am not that selfish now. I'm selfish, God knows that, but I'm not as selfish. And it is I think the transformation for me has always followed some level of surrender. That I give this idea up. I give up the idea.
It's dropping something.
What?
It's dropping something.
Yeah. Yeah, I dropped the idea that I didn't have a good childhood, because I did. I had a wonderful childhood. It's just that I had the crap beat out of me a couple of times. And psychologists today will tell you that transforms you, you know. You just go the wrong way. And this program makes that adjustment for us. And so that's, in my experience, that's why I beat the drum all the time about if you're new, we need to do service, which is transforming. When you're a taker all your life, you know, and you start to be a giver and you give service, even if it's mopping the floor, which is, when I say even mopping the floor, I'm telling you, when Kenny and I were first going to meetings, when it was time to clean up, we would stay and I would mop, those of you that were Ohio Avenue, even with, when they had a cleanup crew, I got to participate in the cleanup. And then a lot of times it occurred to me, why in the hell am I the only one here that cleans up at every meeting, you know? And there's no transformation there. But there's transformation in the steps. Now, the service is important, and we got to get our newcomers into service. But I argue, get them into the steps. Don't wait forever to do that. Let's get them into the steps and give them a break. Let them start transforming their lives. Now, I know you guys, and I know you do that. But I had thought about this when I was thinking of a much different crowd. Go back to your share.
On Wednesday, I was in a men's spiritual group, and Richard Rohr said, "It's giving until the giving feels like receiving."
Yeah, ain't that great?
That's a pretty good quote.
That's a transformation.
Howard's story with his dad and the transformation of his viewpoint, and Sandy's talk about there was the childhood I had and the childhood I thought I had. That transformation happened without any intellectual intent. There was a cooperation. There was kind of a sense of obedience to that once he got a sense that he was in a process that was beneficial to him. But it wasn't designed by the mind. It wasn't a gathering. The biggest problem that almost all of us have is we're mind-bound. We're thinking all the time. And we're very interested in the content of our internal dialogue. And that's what just grabs us and takes us out of the process. One of the wonders of meditation is that in meditation, they say you see that you don't do it very well, and you see how many thoughts are going through the pipe. But you start to see they're going through the pipe, but I'm not generating. There's no intention of where when you're just kind of caught up in the stream of consciousness, you get a sense that you're generating that, or that's what is present. That's what's you. That's what, when in fact, it is just kind of nonsensical mental, neurological stimulation of thought. I mean, I don't know what we generate, like 60,000 thoughts a day or an hour or whatever the hell it is, but it's a very high volume. Once in a while, one has Velcro on it that concerns us, and we paste it on our eyeball. and it literally becomes our reality. And I had a hole in the fence that I viewed life through, and it was just under the cow's tail. There were other holes in the fence, but I had my chair set up there, and I had my iced tea, and I had an umbrella over the chair, and there was a path through the grass to that particular. Once in a while, the cow would move, and I'd get a different view, but most of the time. But we do that. I remember one day I was having one of the biggest ongoing issues I've had in my life is my business partner of 48 years, always on my inventory. He's a brilliant guy, and we're very different men, and we fought about everything other than money. And he's 53 years sober. I'm 49 years sober. And I was having a really bad day. We just got into it. You know, one of the reasons I don't work anymore is we were getting into it too often, and we love each other. But it was, this getting into it, it gets to a point where when there's no rubber on the tire, I have no business riding on the rim. I just, and we still are partners, and importantly so. But I go over to this woman psychologist, and I used to joke about her that she was a goddamn fraud. I said, all I do is get in the elevator, and I on the 3rd floor going up to the 8th floor, I already know what you're going to say. Now, it's helpful. It takes away the pain, but But I walked into her room in tears. And she sat down and she came over and she said, "Oh, baby, you've forgotten who you are." And that's what I'd say to everybody in the room. You've forgotten who you are. It is the eagle's egg in the barnyard. It is so beyond, it is so magnificent, the process that we have the opportunity to be involved in, and it is not up to us. It's simply getting rid of what's in the way. It's that process of removal. To find, it's a journey home. It's becoming you. I mean, don't you feel, 20 years? I mean, you were a pretty big horse's ass. And today you have, I'm talking to Tom. No, but the younger guys that would go to you and look at what you're doing, you say, "Boy, that's really cool." Well, that wasn't cool 30 years ago. It wasn't cool at all. And from my viewpoint, if I were looking at your life, what you have today has always been there. In place, intact, undiminished, obscured, hidden, and not consciously available to you, but there. And I think that most of us feel that way. It is that becoming who you've always been. It isn't, and it is empowering. It is, we're individualized packets of God. We're soaker hoses. I mean, the holes are in the different places. I mean, but it's the same spirit, that little Joe and Rick routine about when you get rid of all the accidental distinctions, we're all doing the same thing with the same thing. We're done.